Sherlock Holmes and the Case of the Barrister Who Disappeared Twice. Chapter 1. The Man Who Vanished from a Locked Room. In the autumn of 1896, London lay beneath a mantle of fog so dense that the gas lamps along Baker Street appeared as pale orange stars suspended in a sea of grey. The city seemed muffled, its noises softened, its movements obscured, as though the great metropolis wished to conceal its secrets from the eyes of honest men. It was upon such a morning that one of the most remarkable cases ever to engage the attention of my friend Sherlock Holmes first presented itself. Holmes sat opposite me in our familiar sitting room at 221B Baker Street. He was stretched languidly upon the sofa, his long fingers pressed together beneath his chin, while a thin ribbon of smoke rose from his pipe toward the ceiling. For my own part, I was attempting to read the morning newspaper. My efforts were interrupted by Holmes. "You have skipped 3 paragraphs, Watson." I lowered the paper. "I beg your pardon. You have read only the first sentence of the parliamentary report, and none of the remainder." I stared at him. "How on earth could you know that?" He waved a hand impatiently. "My dear fellow, your eyes have remained fixed upon precisely the same section for nearly 40 seconds. Furthermore, your left thumb has not moved to turn the page. Lastly, your expression suggests contemplation rather than absorption." I laughed. "You make it sound absurdly simple." "It generally is." He closed his eyes. "You are wondering whether Parliament has achieved anything useful this year." I sat upright. "Holmes, the answer is no." Before I could formulate a reply, Mrs. Hudson entered. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes. Name, Sir Percival Marston." At the announcement, Holmes opened one eye. "Interesting. You know him?" I asked. "I know of him." Mrs. Hudson stepped aside. The visitor entered. He was a distinguished gentleman of perhaps 60 years, broad-shouldered despite his age, with silver hair and keen blue eyes. His clothes were of excellent quality, though his face bore unmistakable signs of strain. He carried a walking stick in one hand and a folded letter in the other. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" Holmes inclined his head. "And Dr. Watson, I presume?" I acknowledged him. Sir Percival remained standing for a moment. "I have come because Scotland Yard has failed me." Holmes gestured toward a chair. "That is rarely an encouraging sign." The old gentleman sat heavily. "My nephew has disappeared." Holmes nodded. "A common enough occurrence." Sir Percival shook his head. "Not when he has already disappeared once before." That statement immediately captured my attention. Holmes, however, merely narrowed his eyes. "Please continue." The gentleman unfolded the letter. "My nephew, Adrian Marston, is a barrister. 36 years of age, respected, successful, entirely dependable." He hesitated. "6 months ago, he vanished." "Vanished?" Holmes repeated. "Without warning, without explanation." Sir Percival's voice grew tense. "He left his chambers near Lincoln's Inn at 6:30 in the evening. Witnesses saw him enter a cab. And then? No trace. For how long? 9 days. I exchanged a glance with Holmes. 9 days? I said. "Yes." "What explanation did he provide upon his return?" Sir Percival looked troubled. "None." "None?" "He claimed he could remember nothing." Holmes sat forward slightly. "Amnesia?" "That was the doctor's conclusion." "And you accepted it?" The old man hesitated. "I did not know what else to think." Holmes said nothing. "Then," Sir Percival continued, 3 months passed. Life returned to normal. Adrian resumed his work. The matter seemed finished. His hands tightened around the letter. Until last week. The room grew still. "What happened?" asked Holmes. "He disappeared again." For several moments there was silence. The ticking of the mantel clock seemed unusually loud. "Under what circumstances?" Holmes asked. Sir Percival swallowed. "This is why I have come." He handed over the letter. Holmes unfolded it. I watched his eyes move rapidly across the page. After a moment he passed it to me. The letter was brief. It read, "Dear Uncle, I fear something terrible is about to happen. If anything should occur, do not trust appearances. There is a man following me. I cannot explain further. Burn this letter after reading. Adrian." The message ended there. I looked up. When was this written? 3 days before he vanished. Holmes tapped the arm of his chair. "And the disappearance itself?" Sir Percival took a deep breath. "My nephew was working late at his chambers. Alone, so far as anyone knows. What time? Shortly after 9. And then?" The old gentleman leaned forward. "He vanished from a locked room." Even Holmes appeared intrigued. "Locked from the inside?" "Yes." I felt a slight chill. The clerk arrived the following morning. The door was bolted and forced open. "Exactly." Holmes nodded. "What was found?" Sir Percival answered immediately. "His desk." "Naturally." "His papers." "Continue." "His coat." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "His coat?" "Folded neatly over a chair." "What else?" Sir Percival's voice lowered. "His pocket watch." I noticed Holmes's attention sharpen. "Interesting." "And finally," the gentleman stopped. "Yes?" A pool of blood. The room fell silent. I felt my pulse quicken. "Was a body discovered?" I asked. "No." "Any sign of struggle?" "None." "Any weapon?" "None." Holmes stood suddenly. Whenever he rose with such abrupt energy, I knew his mind had seized upon something. He crossed to the window. For nearly a minute he stared into the fog. At last he spoke. "You said your nephew disappeared twice." "Yes." "The first disappearance lasted 9 days." "Correct." "The second occurred in a locked room." "Yes." Holmes turned. "Which fact troubles you most?" Sir Percival answered without hesitation. "The blood." Holmes smiled faintly. "It should not." The old gentleman blinked. "What do you mean?" "The blood is probably the least important detail in your entire account." I confess that even I was astonished. "A man vanishes from a locked room," I protested. "Blood is discovered. Surely that is significant." "My dear Watson," said Holmes, "that is precisely why it is insignificant." He picked up the letter once more. "The truly important fact is that Mr. Adrian Marston anticipated the event." Sir Percival stared. Holmes held up the note. "Do not trust appearances." His eyes gleamed. "The moment a man writes such a sentence before disappearing, the mystery ceases to be whether he vanished." Holmes placed the letter upon the table. "The mystery becomes why he wished us to believe one thing while concealing another." The old gentleman rose eagerly. "Then you'll take the case?" Holmes reached for his violin. "My dear Sir Percival, a barrister who disappears twice is interesting." A faint smile touched his lips. "A barrister who warns us not to trust appearances before vanishing from a locked room is irresistible." Outside, the fog thickened against the windows of Baker Street. And thus began the strange affair of Adrian Marston, a case which would lead us from the quiet libraries of Lincoln's Inn to the darkest corners of Victorian London, and ultimately to a truth so unexpected that even I, who knew Holmes better than any living man, failed to glimpse it until the very end. Chapter 2. The Barrister's Empty Chambers. The following morning broke cold and colourless over London. A pale mist lingered above the streets, as Holmes and I accompanied Sir Percival Marston to Lincoln's Inn, where the missing barrister had maintained his professional chambers for nearly 10 years. As our cab rolled through the ancient legal district, I could not help admiring the curious atmosphere of the place. The narrow courtyards, weathered stone buildings, and centuries-old archways seemed untouched by modern progress. Black-robed clerks hurried across the squares, while solicitors emerged from offices carrying bundles of documents tied neatly with red ribbon. To Holmes, however, architecture held little interest. His eyes remained half-closed throughout the journey. I had long since learned that such apparent indifference concealed the most intense mental activity. Sir Percival finally broke the silence. "You have formed some theory already, Mr. Holmes." "No." The answer surprised him. "No." A theory unsupported by evidence is merely prejudice. The old gentleman frowned. Then where do we begin? With facts. Holmes glanced through the cab window, and preferably facts that have not already been interpreted by Scotland Yard. A few minutes later we entered a narrow courtyard enclosed by sombre brick buildings. Sir Percival pointed upward, second floor. We climbed a worn staircase and reached a polished oak door bearing a brass plate. Adrian Marston, Barrister A.T. Law. The entrance stood open. A tall man with a sandy moustache awaited us. Inspector Lestrade. Holmes, Lestrade. The inspector nodded curtly. I suspected you'd appear sooner or later. You flatter me. I assure you I do not. Holmes smiled. Lestrade's sharp features suggested a man who had slept little. His annoyance became obvious when he noticed Holmes examining the hallway rather than entering the chambers. Looking for footprints? No. What then? The reason the maid dusted only half the banister. Lestrade blinked. What possible relevance could that have? None whatsoever. Holmes entered. Which is why I find it interesting. I noticed Lestrade mutter something under his breath. The chambers themselves consisted of 3 connected rooms, a reception office, a small library, and the principal study where Adrian Marston had supposedly vanished. The study was spacious and orderly. Tall bookcases lined the walls. Legal volumes occupied every shelf. A coal fire sat cold in the grate. Near the centre stood an imposing mahogany desk. Behind it rested a high-backed leather chair. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary, and yet one could not escape the strange feeling that something essential was missing. Perhaps it was simply the knowledge that a man had disappeared from this very room. Lestrade folded his arms. As you can see, nothing remarkable. Holmes wandered silently through the room. The blood? Lestrade pointed. A few drops near the desk. A faint stain remained visible upon the carpet. Only a small quantity. No signs of violence? None. No weapon? None. No hidden passage? The inspector sighed. We searched every inch. Holmes crouched beside the stain. For several moments he examined it without speaking. Then he stood. How old is the carpet? Lestrade stared. The carpet? Yes. I have no idea. That is unfortunate. Holmes crossed the room. What was found on the desk? Ordinary legal papers. Nothing unusual? No. Sir Percival spoke. There was one thing. Holmes turned immediately. Oh? My nephew had been working on a property dispute. A current case. Yes. Name? Harcourt versus Belling. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. And the files remain? Most of them. Most, Lestrade answered. Several documents are missing. That caught Holmes's attention. Which documents? The final witness statements. When were they removed? We don't know. Holmes exchanged a glance with me. The first inconsistency had appeared. A man vanishes, blood remains, yet only specific legal documents disappear. Holmes walked slowly around the desk. Suddenly he stopped. Interesting. What is it? I asked. He pointed toward the floor. At first I saw nothing. Then I noticed faint scratches upon the wood beneath the desk. Tiny marks, barely visible. Lestrade leaned closer. What of them? Holmes ignored him. He knelt and studied the scratches through a magnifying lens. For nearly a minute he remained motionless. Then he rose. Did Scotland Yard move the furniture? No. Did anyone? No. Holmes nodded. I thought not. What do they mean? Asked Sir Percival. I haven't decided. This answer seemed genuine. He moved toward the windows. The study overlooked the courtyard below. Both windows remained locked. Holmes inspected the catches carefully. Opened recently? No, said Lestrade. We checked. Holmes tested them himself. Then he examined the dust upon the frame. A faint smile appeared. Quite right. The inspector looked pleased. It was a rare moment. Unfortunately, it lasted only seconds. Holmes suddenly pointed upward. What about that? We followed his gaze. A narrow ventilation opening sat near the ceiling. Lestrade laughed. "Surely you don't think a grown man escaped through there?" "I do not." "Then why ask?" "Because I dislike ignoring anything," the inspector groaned. Holmes continued his examination. He measured distances, inspected books, opened drawers, examined ink bottles, studied papers, questioned clerks. Not once did he explain his purpose. Several hours passed. At last we met the chief clerk, Mr. Edwin Potter. He was a nervous man in his 40s, with spectacles perched upon the end of his nose. Holmes questioned him patiently. "When did you last see Mr. Marston?" 9 o'clock. His mood? Nervous. How so? He kept looking out the window. Expecting someone? I believe so. What else? The clerk hesitated. There was an argument. Holmes immediately became alert. With whom? A visitor. Name? I don't know. Describe him. Tall. Many men are tall. Dark beard. Anything distinctive? The clerk frowned. He walked with a cane. Sir Percival looked surprised. "You never told me this." No one asked. Holmes sighed softly. One of his greatest frustrations was mankind's inability to volunteer useful information. What time did this visitor leave? Around 8:30. And afterward? Mr. Marston seemed disturbed. Frightened? Perhaps. Angry? Possibly. The clerk adjusted his spectacles. There was something else. Yes? I heard Mr. Marston lock the study door. Holmes became very still. You heard it? Quite clearly? And that was unusual? Very. Why? Because he almost never locked it. Holmes thanked him. When the clerk departed, Lestrade shrugged. There you have it. Have what? The victim locked himself inside. Perhaps. Lestrade frowned. Either he did or he didn't. Holmes smiled faintly. My dear Lestrade, those are indeed the traditional possibilities. The inspector's expression darkened. Outside the chambers, Holmes finally spoke freely. What do you think, Watson? I think the visitor is important. Certainly. And the missing documents? Undoubtedly. And the blood? Possibly. I sighed. You already know something. A little. What? He adjusted his coat. Our missing barrister made a mistake. What mistake? He vanished too perfectly. I stared. That is a mistake. It often is. He paused. Especially when one wishes to convince others that one has been abducted. The words startled me. You believe he disappeared voluntarily? I did not say that. But, Holmes raised a hand. Observe carefully, Watson. His eyes drifted toward the study windows above us. The room tells one story. The evidence tells another. And whenever two stories disagree, he stopped. What then? A peculiar expression crossed his face. Then someone is lying. At that precise moment, a messenger boy came running into the courtyard. He carried a sealed envelope. For Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Holmes accepted it. The boy immediately departed. The envelope contained no name, no address, no signature. Only a single folded sheet. Holmes opened it. For the first time that day, I saw genuine surprise upon his face. What is it? I asked. Without speaking, he handed me the paper. Upon it were written only 6 words. You are 3 months too late. Nothing else. No explanation, no signature, no clue as to its sender. Yet something in Holmes's expression told me that our mysterious adversary had just made his first move, and the game had become considerably more dangerous. Chapter 3. The Letter Without a Sender. As we departed Lincoln's Inn that afternoon, the anonymous message remained folded within Holmes's pocketbook. Though he made no immediate comment upon it, I could tell that it occupied a prominent place among his thoughts. Indeed, during our journey back to Baker Street, he spoke scarcely a dozen words. This silence was not unusual. When Holmes encountered a fact that did not fit comfortably within existing evidence, he preferred contemplation to speculation. By the time we reached Baker Street, darkness had begun to descend upon London. The fog had thickened. Street lamps glowed like distant lanterns upon a battlefield. Mrs. Hudson brought tea. Holmes ignored it completely. Instead, he spread various papers across the table and arranged them into neat rows. The mysterious letter, a sketch of the study, witness statements, newspaper reports concerning the first disappearance. For nearly an hour he worked without interruption. Finally he sat back. "Watson." "Yes? Tell me what we know." I smiled. This was one of his favourite exercises. "Very well." I gathered my thoughts. "Adrian Marston disappeared 6 months ago." "Correct." "He returned after 9 days." "Yes." "He claimed memory loss." Holmes nodded. "Continue." "He resumed his life." "Good." 3 months later he became anxious." "Excellent." "He wrote a warning to Sir Percival." "Yes." I tapped the note upon the table. "Do not trust appearances." "Quite." Then he vanished again. Holmes folded his arms. "And?" "He disappeared from a locked room." "Supposedly." I frowned. "Supposedly?" "The room was locked. Whether he vanished from it remains another matter." I sighed. "You delight in making everything complicated." "My dear Watson, reality accomplishes that task admirably without my assistance." He picked up the anonymous message. "What does this suggest?" I examined it. Someone knows something. Astonishing. Someone connected to the case. Less astonishing. I thought for a moment. The phrase, 3 months too late, seems important. Very. Because the second disappearance occurred only a week ago. Precisely. I felt excitement stir within me. Then the writer refers to something that happened 3 months earlier. Holmes smiled. "At last." He rose. "Come." "Where?" "To the newspaper archives." "The archives?" "One cannot investigate the present while remaining ignorant of the past." Thus, despite the advancing evening, we found ourselves travelling toward Fleet Street. The offices of the newspaper occupied an imposing stone building filled with clerks, editors, and the ceaseless clatter of printing machinery. Holmes possessed acquaintances everywhere. Within minutes, we had secured access to months of archived publications. For nearly 2 hours we searched reports concerning Adrian Marston. The first disappearance had attracted considerable attention. Barrister missing. Legal mystery. Prominent lawyer returns. Most articles repeated identical facts. Marston vanished. Marston returned. Marston remembered nothing. Nothing remarkable. Nothing useful. Then Holmes abruptly stopped. There. I looked over his shoulder. The article itself appeared insignificant. It concerned a charity dinner attended by several legal professionals. Among the guests listed was Adrian Marston. "What about it?" Holmes pointed. "Date." I examined it. 3 months ago. Exactly 3 months before the second disappearance. So, read further. I obeyed. Halfway down the page appeared a brief note, 1 sentence only. A prominent businessman named Theodore Wrexham had collapsed during the dinner and died later that evening. I looked up. Interesting? More than interesting. Why? Holmes folded the newspaper carefully. Because Theodore Wrexham was the principal party in the property dispute Marston was handling. My surprise must have shown immediately. The same dispute? The very one. I felt a chill. That cannot be coincidence. Few things are. We obtained additional reports. Theodore Wrexham had been wealthy, influential, widely respected. His death had been attributed to heart failure. No suspicion had arisen. No investigation followed. A natural death, a closed matter. Yet Holmes stared thoughtfully at the page. "What troubles you?" "The timing." "What about it?" "Wrexham dies." "Yes." 3 months later, Marston disappears. Correct. Meanwhile, someone sends us a message mentioning precisely 3 months. I understood immediately. You think the events are connected? I think they would be fools not to be. We returned to Baker Street shortly before midnight. I expected Holmes to retire. Instead, he requested his violin. Whenever his thoughts reached a particularly difficult stage, music often helped arrange them. For nearly an hour he played. The mournful notes drifted through the room while I attempted to organize the evidence in my notebook. Eventually the music ceased. Holmes lowered the instrument. "Watson." "Yes?" "What do you know of Theodore Wrexham?" "Nothing." "Neither do I." "Then perhaps we should learn." His eyes gleamed. "Exactly." The following morning we began. By noon we had assembled a curious portrait. Theodore Wrexham had built a substantial fortune through property development. He owned warehouses, factories, and extensive land holdings. His reputation appeared excellent. His business records appeared spotless. Yet something bothered Holmes. I recognized the signs. He repeatedly reviewed the same documents, examined the same dates, compared the same names. At last he struck the table lightly. "There! What have you found?" "A ghost." I stared. "A ghost? A figurative one." He handed me a ledger. "Observe. The book contained lists of companies connected to Wrexham. Most appeared ordinary. One, however, appeared repeatedly. Blackthorn Investments. What about it?" "It does not exist." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "It exists on paper." "And?" "It owns property." "Yes." "It transfers money." "Naturally." "It signs contracts." "Certainly." Holmes leaned forward. "Yet no one can identify a single employee." That was strange. Perhaps a holding company? Perhaps. He smiled faintly. Or perhaps something else. Before I could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered. "A gentleman wishes to see you." Holmes glanced toward the clock. "Name?" "He refuses to give one." Holmes exchanged a quick glance with me. "Show him up." Moments later the visitor entered. He was tall, broad-shouldered, well-dressed, and heavily bearded. I immediately recalled the clerk's description of the man who had argued with Adrian Marston. The stranger removed his hat. His eyes never left Holmes. "I understand you are investigating Mr. Marston's disappearance." Holmes remained seated. "Who are you?" "That is unimportant." "It is essential." The man's expression hardened. "Then consider me a concerned acquaintance." "A concerned acquaintance who conceals his identity." The visitor ignored the remark. "I have come to offer advice." Holmes smiled. "I am rarely in need of it." "Abandon this case." The room fell silent. I saw Holmes's eyes sharpen. "Indeed, you are pursuing dangerous people. Dangerous people often pursue me." The stranger stepped forward. "This matter concerns events better left buried." Holmes folded his hands. "How dramatic." The man's jaw tightened. "Take the warning seriously. Or, Dr. Watson may suffer consequences." The threat hung heavily in the air. I rose instantly, but Holmes remained perfectly calm. In fact, he appeared amused. "My dear sir," he said softly, "you have just made a grave error." The stranger frowned. "What error?" "You assumed I dislike being threatened." A dangerous gleam entered Holmes's eyes. "In reality, I find it extraordinarily motivating." For several seconds neither man moved. Then the visitor turned abruptly and strode toward the door. At the threshold he paused. Without looking back he spoke. "3 men have already disappeared because of Theodore Wrexham." The words struck the room like a gunshot. The stranger departed. The door slammed shut behind him. For several moments neither Holmes nor I spoke. Then I turned slowly. "3 men?" Holmes stared thoughtfully at the closed door. "Apparently. And Adrian Marston is one of them?" "Perhaps." His gaze drifted toward the anonymous note, toward the papers, toward the growing web of connections surrounding Theodore Wrexham. Then he smiled. Not with satisfaction, with anticipation. "Our mystery, Watson, has finally begun." And for the first time since accepting the case, I suspected that Adrian Marston's disappearance was merely one piece of a far larger and far more dangerous puzzle. Chapter 4. 3 Men and a Dead Financier. The stranger's warning occupied our thoughts throughout the following day. 3 men have already disappeared because of Theodore Wrexham. The statement possessed a curious power. It was specific enough to be meaningful and vague enough to be deeply unsettling. Holmes, however, refused to speculate. "Facts first," he repeated, whenever I attempted to discuss possible explanations. By 10 o'clock the next morning, we were seated in a hired cab bound for the city. Our destination was the office of Theodore Wrexham's former solicitor. The deceased financier had left behind a substantial estate, and Holmes hoped that legal records might reveal what public documents concealed. The office occupied several rooms above a banking house. We were received by Mr. Alistair Greaves, a thin, meticulous gentleman whose precise manner suggested a lifelong devotion to paperwork. He appeared surprised when Holmes mentioned Wrexham's name. "I thought all inquiries concerning that matter had concluded." "Apparently not," Holmes replied. The solicitor hesitated. "May I ask why your interest has been renewed?" "You may." The man waited. Holmes remained silent. After several uncomfortable seconds, Greaves sighed. "I see." "A useful observation," said Holmes. The solicitor reluctantly invited us inside. His office was lined with cabinets containing legal records dating back decades. Every shelf appeared organized with almost military precision. Holmes approved immediately. One could always tell when a room pleased him. His shoulders relaxed, his eyes brightened. A chaotic office irritated him profoundly. A well-ordered one inspired confidence. "Wrexham was an important client?" Holmes asked. "Very." "How long?" "Nearly 15 years. "And Blackthorne Investments?" The solicitor froze. "Only briefly." But Holmes noticed. He always noticed. "What of it?" asked Greaves. "You know the company." "Naturally." "You handled its affairs?" "Some of them." Holmes smiled faintly. "Then perhaps you can explain why it appears to exist without employees." The solicitor adjusted his spectacles. "It was a holding corporation." "Who owned it?" "I cannot disclose confidential information, even after the owner's death." "Especially after the owner's death." Holmes nodded. "As I expected." For nearly an hour he questioned the solicitor. Most answers proved unhelpful. Others proved suspiciously cautious. Yet one detail emerged. Theodore Wrexham had altered his will shortly before his death. Very shortly. "How long before?" Holmes asked. 4 days. That fact immediately captured my attention. "What changes were made?" Holmes continued. "I am not at liberty to say." "Of course." Holmes stood. "Thank you, Mr. Greaves." The solicitor looked relieved, until Holmes reached the door. Then my friend paused. "One final question." "Yes?" "Did Adrian Marston witness the amendment?" The solicitor's face betrayed him. "Only for an instant. But it was enough." "He did." Holmes smiled. "Precisely what I expected." Outside, I turned toward him. "You already knew?" "No. But you suspected?" "Certainly." "What does it mean?" Holmes hailed a cab. "It means our missing barrister possessed knowledge that became dangerous after Wrexham's death." We travelled next to the offices of a financial journal. Holmes wished to investigate Wrexham's business associates. The task consumed several hours. Most names led nowhere. A few proved mildly interesting. One proved remarkable. His name was Nathaniel Crowe, a chartered accountant, formerly employed by Blackthorne Investments. Formerly. The distinction became significant when we learned he had disappeared 7 months earlier. I stared at Holmes. 7 months? Before Marston's first disappearance. Exactly. We obtained newspaper reports. Nathaniel Crowe had vanished while travelling home from work. No witnesses, no explanation, no body, no arrests. A mystery that quickly faded from public attention. Holmes folded the newspaper. One man. Yes. One of the 3? Likely. And the others? We continue. The second name emerged shortly before evening. Jonathan Reed, a surveyor, employed on property evaluations connected to Blackthorne Investments. He had disappeared 4 months ago. Again without explanation. Again without resolution. Again no body. Again no arrest. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Nathaniel Crowe, Jonathan Reed, Adrian Marston, 3 professional men, all connected indirectly to Theodore Wrexham, all vanished, all without trace, and now an anonymous stranger had warned Holmes to abandon the investigation. As we returned toward Baker Street, I voiced the obvious question. What could they have discovered? Holmes gazed through the cab window. I am beginning to wonder whether discovery is the correct word. What do you mean? Suppose they did not discover something. Then, suppose someone showed them something. The distinction escaped me. Holmes offered no further explanation. Back at Baker Street, we found Lestrade waiting impatiently. He occupied our sitting room with the resigned expression of a man expecting disappointment. About time. Holmes removed his coat. What catastrophe brings you here? I've found your bearded visitor. That immediately captured our attention. You identified him, yes. Who is he? Lestrade smiled triumphantly. His name is Malcolm Vane. The name meant nothing to me. Apparently it meant little to Holmes as well. A profession, private investigator. That surprised us both. A detective? I asked. Former detective. Lestrade nodded. Worked several years for a commercial inquiry agency. And now? No one seems entirely certain. Holmes sat down. Tell me everything. The inspector produced a notebook. Vane investigated Theodore Wrexham 2 years ago. Holmes leaned forward. On whose behalf? We don't know. And the result? Unknown. Convenient. Lestrade shrugged. It gets better. Go on. 6 months ago, Vane vanished. The room fell silent. I looked from Lestrade to Holmes, then back again. Vanished. Completely. Like Marston. Exactly like Marston. For the first time all day, Holmes appeared genuinely astonished. Lestrade seemed pleased by the effect. You didn't expect that. No. Holmes smiled slowly. I did not. Vane disappeared for 11 days. Then returned? Yes. Memory loss? Claimed memory loss. A long silence followed. I felt the pieces shifting, not fitting together, but moving. Like fragments of a puzzle whose picture remained hidden. Finally Holmes spoke. How many disappearances connected to Wrexham does that make? Lestrade counted mentally. Crowe. Yes. Reed. Yes. Marston. Yes. Vane. Yes. 4. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. Not 3. Lestrade frowned. What? Our visitor said 3 men had disappeared. Perhaps he excluded himself. The implication struck immediately. Lestrade sat upright. You think Vane was the man who visited Baker Street? I am nearly certain. The inspector stared. Then why warn us? Holmes rose and paced slowly before the fireplace. Because he is frightened. Of whom? That, Holmes replied softly, is becoming the central question. As evening descended, Holmes withdrew into one of his reflective moods. He filled pages with notes, constructed timelines, compared dates, cross-referenced names. For hours he worked without interruption. Then suddenly he stopped. The movement was so abrupt that I looked up immediately. Holmes stood motionless beside the table, his eyes fixed upon a single date. A curious expression crossed his face. Recognition. Not certainty, but recognition. The look of a man who has glimpsed the outline of something concealed. What is it? I asked. He pointed toward the timeline. 4 disappearances, 4 names, 4 dates. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then the pattern emerged. Each disappearance had occurred exactly 32 days after a documented meeting involving Theodore Wrexham's affairs. The intervals were identical. Perfectly identical. Even Holmes seemed troubled by it. No coincidence could produce this. You believe it was planned? It was orchestrated. He stared at the dates. But by whom? Before either of us could explore the question further, a sharp knock echoed through Baker Street. Mrs. Hudson entered carrying a telegram. It arrived moments ago. Holmes accepted it. The message contained only a single sentence. His expression hardened immediately. What is it? I asked. Without speaking, He handed me the telegram. I read, "Mr. Malcolm Vane, found dead in Southwark. Come at once." Lestrade, I looked up in disbelief. "But Lestrade is here." The inspector snatched the telegram. His face paled. For several moments none of us spoke. Then Holmes quietly reached for his coat. "The game has changed." "How?" His eyes remained fixed upon the telegram. "Because someone has just murdered a man who may have held the answers." He paused. "And unless I am very much mistaken, the murderer knew we were about to find him." Chapter 5. The Corpse That Should Not Exist. Within 20 minutes of receiving the telegram, Holmes, Lestrade and I were speeding southward through the fog-covered streets of London. The telegram itself remained a source of bewilderment. The inspector sitting beside us was very much alive, yet the message bore his name. Furthermore, it had been delivered through official channels. Someone had gone to considerable effort to ensure we received it. Could it be a trap? I asked. "Almost certainly," said Holmes. "Then why walk into it?" He smiled faintly. "My dear Watson, the most dangerous traps are often the most informative." Lestrade grunted. "That's easy for you to say." "It is." The inspector glared at him. Holmes appeared entirely unconcerned. Our destination was a narrow street near the Southwark docks. One of Lestrade's actual subordinates had dispatched a messenger after discovering a body. The deceased had been tentatively identified as Malcolm Vane. By the time we arrived, uniformed constables had secured the area. A small crowd had gathered despite the late hour. The dead continue to attract the living. It is one of humanity's oldest habits. The body had been discovered inside an abandoned warehouse overlooking the river. The building itself appeared neglected. Broken windows, rotting timbers. Dust accumulated upon every surface. Yet the constable stationed at the entrance greeted Lestrade immediately. "Inspector, where?" "Upstairs." We climbed a narrow staircase. The second floor consisted of a single large room. Lanterns illuminated the interior. At the centre lay a covered figure. A police surgeon stood nearby. He acknowledged Lestrade with a nod. "Inspector, you've examined him, preliminarily, and—" The surgeon hesitated. "It's peculiar." Holmes smiled. "Excellent." The doctor looked confused. "I beg your pardon. Ordinary cases are rarely worth leaving Baker Street for." Without waiting for permission, Holmes approached the body. The sheet was lifted. I confess that I felt a slight shock. The resemblance to our visitor was unmistakable. The beard, the build, the facial features, everything appeared identical. "This is Malcolm Vane?" Holmes asked. "Almost certainly," said the surgeon. "Cause of death?" "A gunshot wound." He pointed toward the chest. "The bullet entered here." "Time of death?" "Approximately 12 hours ago." Holmes crouched beside the body. For several moments he studied the face, then the hands, then the clothing. His expression gradually became more interested. A dangerous sign. I had witnessed it many times. Whenever Holmes became interested, complexity soon followed. "What troubles you?" I asked. "This." He lifted the dead man's right hand. The fingers displayed heavy calluses, particularly upon the index finger and thumb. "What of them?" "These are recent." The surgeon nodded. "Indeed. Consistent with shooting." Holmes looked thoughtful. "A man accustomed to firearms." "Yes." He released the hand. "Anything else?" The surgeon cleared his throat. "There is another matter." "What matter?" "We found something in his pocket." A sealed envelope was produced. Upon its front appeared 3 handwritten words. "For Sherlock Holmes." The room fell silent. Even Lestrade looked unsettled. Holmes accepted the envelope. "Has anyone opened it?" "No." "Good." He broke the seal carefully. Inside rested a single folded sheet. The handwriting matched that of the anonymous note received previously. Holmes read silently. Then he handed it to me. The message contained only one sentence. "You are still 3 months too late." A chill passed through me. The same phrase, the same warning, the same obsession with 3 months. "What does it mean?" asked Lestrade. Holmes folded the paper. I am beginning to suspect that someone desperately wishes us to focus upon the wrong date. The inspector frowned. What? 3 months. Yes. It appears too often. Perhaps because it's important, or because someone wishes us to believe it is. Lestrade sighed. Only you could find a clue suspicious because it appears repeatedly. Holmes smiled. Repetition is frequently the enemy of truth. The surgeon resumed his examination. Meanwhile, Holmes wandered through the warehouse. The floor consisted of aged wooden planks covered with dust. Broken crates occupied one corner. Ropes and rusted machinery filled another. The room appeared abandoned. Yet Holmes soon halted beside a window overlooking the river. What is it? I asked. He pointed downward. A faint trail disturbed the dust. Not footprints. Something else. A narrow line. As though a heavy object had been dragged across the floor. The mark led toward the body, then stopped. Holmes followed it carefully. For several minutes he remained silent. Finally he stood. Interesting. What? The body did not die here. Lestrade immediately approached. You're certain? No. Then why say it? Because certainty is boring, the inspector groaned. Holmes pointed toward the floor. The drag marks. So, the corpse was moved. The surgeon examined the evidence. After a moment he nodded reluctantly. He may be correct. Lestrade folded his arms. Wonderful. Holmes continued his inspection. A few minutes later, he discovered something even more curious. A cigar, half-smoked, discarded beneath a crate. That alone would not have been unusual. What attracted his attention was the brand. He lifted it carefully. Watson. I joined him. The label. I examined the band. A small golden crest decorated its surface. Beneath appeared the name, Valmont and Sons. Holmes smiled faintly. Rare. You know it? Very. Expensive? Extremely. Meaning the owner possessed money. Lestrade shrugged. Half of London possesses money. Not enough to waste it on cigars costing 2 guineas each. The inspector reluctantly acknowledged the point. The cigar was secured as evidence. By midnight, our investigation concluded. As we prepared to leave, Holmes paused beside the body once more. For nearly a minute he studied the dead man's face. Then suddenly he turned toward the surgeon. Would you kindly expose the left ear? The request seemed peculiar. Nevertheless, it was done. Holmes examined the ear closely. A strange expression crossed his face. What is it? I asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he leaned closer, then closer still. At last he stepped back. Extraordinary. The surgeon frowned. What? Holmes pointed. I moved forward. At first I saw nothing. Then I noticed it. A tiny scar hidden behind the ear, almost invisible, a thin white line, no longer than half an inch. Holmes's eyes glittered. How old would you estimate that scar? The surgeon examined it. Several years. Perhaps older. Possibly. Holmes nodded. No further explanation followed. We left the warehouse. The fog along the river had thickened considerably. Gas lamps glimmered through the darkness like distant stars. For some time we walked in silence. Finally I could contain myself no longer. Holmes. Yes, you've discovered something. A few things. The scar. Among others. What does it mean? He stopped beneath a lamp. For a moment the golden light illuminated his features. I saw excitement there. And concern. A rare combination. Watson, he said quietly, how certain are we that the dead man is Malcolm Vane? I stared. The resemblance is undeniable. Indeed, the police identified him. Naturally. The evidence seems clear. Holmes smiled. Does it? A cold sensation touched my spine. You believe the identification is wrong? I believe nothing. Then why ask? He resumed walking. Because if that corpse is not Malcolm Vane, he paused, then we are hunting an adversary capable of replacing living men with dead ones. The implication struck me immediately, and it was so astonishing that I could think of no reply. Back at Baker Street, Holmes remained awake until dawn. Maps covered the table. Timelines filled entire sheets of paper. Names connected to other names through elaborate networks of notes and markings. When morning finally arrived, he had reached only one conclusion, yet it was enough to trouble even him. For when I awoke, I found him standing beside the window staring into the fog. His breakfast remained untouched. His violin rested silent. "What is it?" I asked. He turned slowly. "Theodore Wrexham." "Yes, I have spent 2 days investigating his death." "And?" Holmes's expression darkened. "I am no longer convinced he died at all." The words hung heavily in the room, and with them the mystery took yet another impossible turn. Chapter 6. The Man Who Attended His Own Funeral. There are moments in every investigation when the accumulated evidence ceases to form a straight road and instead becomes a maze. Such a moment arrived on the morning following our visit to Southwark. I had scarcely finished breakfast when Holmes began pacing before the fireplace. The unusual intensity of his manner told me that his thoughts had advanced considerably during the night. On several occasions he stopped to consult his notes, then resumed pacing, then stopped again. Finally, I could endure the suspense no longer. "You believe Theodore Wrexham survived his supposed death?" Holmes nodded. "I believe the possibility must be examined." "Upon what grounds?" "Several." He lifted a sheet of paper. "First, Wrexham dies unexpectedly." "Yes." 4 days after altering his will. "Correct." "Second, the only known witness to that alteration was Adrian Marston." "Also correct." "Third, every disappearance we have encountered traces back toward Wrexham's affairs." I considered this. "Still, that hardly proves he survived." "Certainly not." Holmes smiled faintly. "It merely suggests that accepting his death without question may be dangerous." A knock interrupted us. Lestrade entered. His expression suggested annoyance. The inspector never enjoyed arriving to discover that Holmes had advanced several steps ahead. "You'll be pleased to know I've verified something." "Excellent." The body in Southwark was identified by a former colleague. Holmes raised an eyebrow. "And?" "It was Malcolm Vane." "Was it?" Lestrade frowned. 3 people confirmed it. 3 people can be mistaken. Not usually, yet occasionally. The inspector sighed. "Must everything become complicated?" "Only the interesting things." Lestrade ignored the remark. "I've also learned something else." "What?" "Vane rented a room in Whitechapel." "Recently?" 3 months ago." Holmes stopped pacing. 3 months. "Exactly." The inspector looked pleased. "Now you're interested." "I was always interested." Lestrade handed him an address. "I thought you might wish to examine it." "An excellent thought." Within the hour, we were travelling eastward. The rented room occupied the upper floor of a modest lodging house. Its landlady, Mrs. Hargreaves, proved eager to assist. She was a stout woman whose curiosity had plainly flourished throughout her life. "Mr. Vane," she said. "Quiet gentleman." "When did he arrive?" Holmes asked. "About 3 months ago." Again the same interval. Again the same date. The repetition was becoming impossible to ignore. "Did he receive visitors?" "Oh yes." Holmes immediately became attentive. "Frequently." "No." "Then describe them." The woman thought for a moment. "There was one gentleman." "What gentleman?" "Tall. Many men are tall. Dark overcoat." "Continue." "He always came after sunset." "Anything distinctive?" The landlady hesitated. "He wore gloves." Lestrade rolled his eyes. "Half of London wears gloves." "Not indoors," Holmes replied quietly. That observation appeared to surprise her. "Now that you mention it, sir, he did keep them on." Holmes and I exchanged a glance. A man who refuses to remove his gloves often wishes to conceal something. Scars, marks, or identity. "What happened during these visits?" Holmes asked. "They talked." "For how long?" "Sometimes hours." "And afterward?" The woman frowned. Mr. Vane always seemed frightened. That answer interested Holmes considerably. We were shown the room. It contained little furniture, a bed, a wardrobe, a writing desk. The place had already been searched by police. Nevertheless, Holmes examined every inch personally. The process consumed nearly 2 hours. At first, nothing remarkable emerged. Then Holmes discovered a concealed compartment beneath the desk. The hiding place was expertly constructed, so well concealed that it might easily have escaped ordinary attention. Inside rested a single notebook. Lestrade immediately reached for it. Holmes intercepted him. Careful. Why? Because someone concealed it. That's obvious, which means someone wished it preserved. The notebook contained only dates. No explanations, no names, no addresses, simply dates, dozens of them. At first glance they appeared meaningless. Then Holmes smiled. What is it? The intervals. I looked more closely. Every date was separated from the next by exactly 32 days. The same pattern, the same impossible regularity. Lestrade frowned. What does it mean? I don't know. Helpful, but I know it matters. Holmes copied the dates into his notebook. Then he turned another page. Suddenly his expression changed. Only slightly, yet enough for me to notice. What have you found? Instead of answering, he handed me the book. Near the final page appeared 3 initials. A-M-J-R-N-C. I stared. Marston. Yes. Reed. Yes. Crow. Exactly. The 3 vanished men. Their initials appeared together. Written in the same hand. Written by Malcolm Vane. The implication was immediate. Vane had known them. Perhaps investigated them. Perhaps met them. Perhaps shared their fate. Yet one thing remained absent. A 4th set of initials. No entry for himself. No MV. Holmes noticed it too. Curious. Why? People usually include themselves in their own records. Before we could examine the matter further, Lestrade called from the wardrobe. I've got something. Inside the wardrobe hung several ordinary suits. Nothing remarkable. Except one coat. A dark wool overcoat. The same sort described by the landlady. Holmes examined it carefully. Then his eyes narrowed. What is it? I asked. He reached into the lining. From a hidden pocket, he withdrew a railway ticket stub. A single destination appeared upon it. Dartmoor. I blinked. Dartmoor? Lestrade looked equally puzzled. What would Vane be doing there? Holmes folded the ticket. An excellent question. The answer arrived sooner than expected. Back at Baker Street, Holmes consulted railway records. The journey had occurred 4 months earlier, almost precisely when Jonathan Reed disappeared. The connection seemed too strong to dismiss. By evening, Holmes had assembled a growing chain of associations. Crow, Reed, Marston, Vane, Dartmoor, Blackthorn Investments, Theodore Wrexham. Each link strengthened the next. Yet the central truth remained hidden. As darkness fell, Holmes made a surprising announcement. We are leaving London. When? Tomorrow. Where? Dartmoor. The name itself carried a certain ominous quality. Vast moors, ancient tors, lonely roads. Few places in England seemed more suited to secrets. You believe Reed vanished there. I believe someone wishes us never to visit. Why? Holmes handed me a telegram. It had arrived less than an hour earlier. The message was unsigned, brief, and unmistakably threatening. Return to Baker Street. The 4th man is already dead. I read it twice, then looked up. The 4th man? Precisely. Who is the 4th man? Holmes stared thoughtfully into the fire. For several moments he remained silent. Then he spoke. Not to me, to himself. The difficulty, Watson, is that I no longer know whether the 4th man is dead, his eyes lifted toward the dancing flames, or whether he is the only one still alive. Those cryptic words remained unexplained. Yet I sensed that Holmes had moved closer to the heart of the mystery than ever before, and somewhere beyond London, upon the lonely reaches of Dartmoor, awaited a clue powerful enough to change everything we believed about Theodore Wrexham, Malcolm Vane, and the barrister who had disappeared twice. Chapter 7. Shadows on Dartmoor. The following morning found Holmes and me aboard the Great Western Railway, speeding southwest through the English countryside. The weather had deteriorated considerably during the night. Heavy clouds rolled across the sky. Rain lashed intermittently against the carriage windows. The landscape beyond appeared bleak and colourless. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated. Few things pleased him more than a mystery that resisted simple explanation, and this particular case had become one of the most perplexing of our acquaintance. 4 disappearances, a dead financier who might not be dead, an investigator who vanished and returned, anonymous warnings, threats, false identities, and a recurring period of exactly 32 days. The pattern haunted every stage of the investigation. As the train carried us toward Dartmoor, Holmes reviewed his notes for perhaps the 20th time. "You have discovered something." He glanced up. "Several things, none of which you intend to share. My dear Watson, I fully intend to share them. When they become facts." I sighed. His methods could be infuriating. By mid-afternoon we reached the nearest station and secured transportation into the moorlands. The countryside grew increasingly desolate. Great stretches of open land extended toward distant hills. Ancient stone formations rose from the earth like forgotten monuments. The sky hung low and grey overhead. Even our driver appeared uneasy. He frequently glanced toward the horizon. "You gentlemen are heading to Black Tor House." Holmes looked interested. "You know it. Everyone round here knows it." The driver's tone suggested that such knowledge was not entirely pleasant. "What can you tell us?" The man shrugged. "Not much. Try. It stood empty for years. Who owned it? No one seemed certain. Yet?" The driver lowered his voice. "People used to visit. Recently? Every month." Holmes immediately became attentive. "Every month? Near enough. How frequently?" The driver considered. 4 weeks or so. 32 days. Again. The same interval. The same rhythm. The pattern had followed us from London into the heart of Devonshire. Holmes exchanged a glance with me. Neither of us commented. The driver continued. "Mostly after dark. Who visited?" "I never saw their faces." "Why not?" "They arrived in closed carriages." "How many?" "Different each time." The answer seemed to please Holmes considerably. At last the road curved around a rocky rise. The house appeared. Even from a distance it looked forlorn. Black Tor House stood alone upon a stretch of elevated ground, overlooking miles of empty moor. Its dark stone walls blended almost perfectly with the surrounding landscape. Several windows were boarded. Others remained broken. The building appeared abandoned. Yet appearances had already proven unreliable throughout this case. We paid the driver, then approached on foot. The wind had strengthened. It carried a mournful sound across the open land. For several moments we simply observed the structure. No caretaker, I noted. No signs of occupation. Visible signs, certainly. The distinction was important. Holmes advanced toward the front entrance. The heavy door stood locked. That presented little obstacle. Within minutes, Holmes had gained access. The interior smelled of dust and damp stone. Our footsteps echoed through empty halls. Broken furniture occupied several rooms. Others appeared entirely bare. Yet, despite years of apparent neglect, Holmes quickly discovered something remarkable. Footprints. Recent footprints. Many of them. They crossed the dust-covered floor in several directions. "Visitors," I said. "Repeated visitors." Holmes knelt. Not merely repeated. He measured one set carefully. "Organized." "What do you mean?" "Observe." He pointed. The prints followed nearly identical routes. as though different individuals had travelled through the building while obeying specific instructions. The effect was strangely unsettling. We continued our exploration. Most rooms revealed nothing. Then, upon the second floor, we discovered a locked chamber. Unlike every other door in the house, this one displayed fresh scratches around the keyhole. Someone had used it recently, frequently. Holmes opened it. The room beyond was unexpectedly clean. Dust covered nothing. Furniture remained intact. The fireplace contained recent ashes. A lamp sat upon a table. Beside it rested several empty glasses. Someone had been using the room, and not long ago, Holmes immediately examined the fireplace. Within the ashes he discovered fragments of partially burned paper. Most proved unreadable. One fragment survived. A few words remained visible. 32 days. Nothing more. Yet the phrase seemed almost mocking in its familiarity. The number followed us everywhere. Lestrade would later describe it as coincidence. Holmes never accepted coincidence when repetition reached such extremes. We searched further. The room contained a wardrobe, a desk, a cabinet. Nothing appeared especially significant. Then Holmes opened a drawer. Inside rested a photograph. Time had faded the image. Nevertheless, 4 men remained clearly visible. I recognized one immediately. Adrian Marston, the missing barrister. 3 other men stood beside him. One appeared to be Malcolm Vane. Another matched photographs of Nathaniel Crowe. The 4th remained unfamiliar. Holmes studied the image closely, then turned it over. Written upon the reverse appeared a single date, 7 months earlier, before the first disappearance, before Vane vanished, before Reed vanished, before everything began. The discovery left us silent. At last I spoke. They knew one another, undoubtedly, which means their disappearances are connected. More connected than we imagined. Holmes slipped the photograph into his pocket. We resumed our search. An hour later we reached the cellar. The atmosphere changed immediately. The lower level felt different from the rest of the house. Less abandoned, more deliberate. The stone floor showed signs of recent use. Lantern soot darkened the ceiling. A heavy iron door occupied the far wall. It stood partially open. Beyond lay a narrow chamber, empty except for a wooden chair, and a series of marks carved into the wall. I moved closer. The marks formed vertical lines grouped in sets, tallies, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds. Someone had counted days. Holmes studied them carefully. Then his expression hardened. "What is it?" he pointed. The marks were organized into groups. Each sequence ended at the same number, 32. Again, always 32. The realization sent a chill through me. Someone had been measuring identical periods, again and again, as though participating in a cycle, a ritual, or a schedule. Holmes examined the chamber for nearly 20 minutes. Then he discovered something hidden beneath the chair, a folded scrap of paper. The writing appeared hurried, uneven, almost desperate. I recognized the name instantly. Adrian Marston. The note had been signed by him. Its contents were brief. "If anyone finds this, trust nothing they tell you. We agreed to disappear. We were deceived. Wrexham is not the leader. He serves someone else." For several moments neither of us spoke. The implications were staggering. We agreed to disappear. The sentence echoed in my mind. Not abducted, not murdered. Agreed. Voluntarily. At least initially. Holmes read the note twice more, then folded it carefully. Remarkable. Holmes. Yes? If this is genuine, it is. Then Marston participated willingly. At first, I stared at the chamber, the tallies, the chair, the hidden note. A terrible possibility began forming. What happened here? Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he examined the floor, then the walls, then the ceiling. At last he spoke. Training. Training or preparation? For what? His expression darkened. That is precisely what I intend to discover. We emerged from the cellar shortly before sunset. The sky outside had grown darker. Storm clouds gathered across the moor. The wind carried distant thunder. As we prepared to leave, Holmes paused suddenly. "What is it?" I asked. He held up a hand, listening. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then I heard it. Footsteps, faint, somewhere within the house. Not ours, not recent echoes. Fresh footsteps, moving across the upper floor. Someone else was inside Black Tor House. Holmes extinguished his lantern instantly. The building plunged into darkness. The footsteps continued, slow, careful, approaching the staircase. A board creaked overhead, then another. Whoever occupied the house knew we were there, and from the expression upon Holmes's face, I knew he believed that person might finally provide the answers we had been seeking, or become the next victim before our eyes. Chapter 8. The Fifth Survivor. The footsteps above us ceased. A profound silence settled over Black Tor House. The storm outside intensified. Rain rattled against broken windows while distant thunder rolled across the moor. Holmes remained perfectly motionless, his head tilted slightly, listening, waiting. I had witnessed this transformation many times. When confronted by danger, Holmes became extraordinarily calm. The more uncertain the situation, the more controlled he appeared. Another floorboard creaked overhead, then silence again. "Stay behind me, Watson," he said quietly. I had already drawn my revolver. Holmes produced a lantern, but kept it unlit. Together we moved toward the staircase. Every step seemed unnaturally loud. The old house groaned around us. Wind whistled through cracks in the stonework. Yet above these sounds remained another, breathing. Someone was waiting. Halfway up the stairs, Holmes suddenly stopped. "Come down." The words echoed through the darkness. No answer followed. "I know you're there." Still silence. Then a voice emerged from the shadows. A man's voice, tired, cautious. "You came sooner than expected." Holmes smiled faintly. "I am often accused of that." The figure stepped forward. A lantern flared. For the first time we saw him clearly. He appeared to be in his early 40s, thin, unshaven. His clothes were worn but not ragged. His eyes revealed something more striking. Fear. Not ordinary fear. The constant vigilance of a man who had spent months expecting betrayal. Holmes studied him carefully. "You know who I am?" "Of course." "Then perhaps you'll save us time by introducing yourself." The man hesitated. Then he spoke. "My name is Jonathan Reed." For a moment I thought I had misheard. Jonathan Reed, the surveyor, one of the vanished men. The man presumed missing for 4 months. Alive. Very much alive. I glanced toward Holmes. His expression remained remarkably composed. Only a slight narrowing of the eyes betrayed surprise. "Interesting," he said. Reed laughed bitterly. "That's all. I reserve stronger reactions for stronger evidence." The man shook his head. "You really are Sherlock Holmes. And you really are Jonathan Reed." A flicker of uncertainty crossed the man's face. Then he nodded. "I can prove it. Later." Holmes stepped forward. "First, tell me why you disappeared." Reed looked toward the rain-streaked windows. His answer came slowly. "Because I was persuaded to." The statement matched Marston's hidden note precisely. "We agreed to disappear." Holmes folded his arms. "Who persuaded you?" The man hesitated. "Theodore Wrexham." At the name, the atmosphere seemed to change. Even now, Wrexham exerted influence over every aspect of the mystery. "You knew him personally?" Holmes asked. "Yes." "How?" "I worked on property surveys for Blackthorn Investments." "And?" Reed swallowed. "One day he approached me privately." "What did he want?" "At first." A hollow smile appeared. "He offered opportunity." "Meaning?" "Money." "How much?" "Enough to change a man's life." Holmes nodded. "And the price?" Reed laughed softly. "The price was disappearing." Thunder shook the house. For several moments nobody spoke. Then Holmes asked the obvious question. Why would anyone pay men to vanish? Reed's expression darkened. Because he needed witnesses. Witnesses to what? The man looked away. I don't know. That answer appeared genuine. Holmes remained unconvinced. You accepted a fortune without understanding the purpose. I understood part of it. Explain. Reed sat heavily upon a broken chair. The exhaustion visible upon his face suggested months of strain. There were 5 of us. The number immediately caught my attention. 5. Not 4, not 3. 5. Who? Holmes asked. Reed began counting. Nathaniel Crowe. The accountant. Yes. Continue. Malcolm Vane. The investigator. Adrian Marston. The barrister. And you. Yes. Holmes waited. The 5th? For several seconds Reed remained silent. Then he answered. Theodore Wrexham. The words struck like a blow. I stared at him. You mean Wrexham joined the group? Reed nodded. He created it. A long silence followed. At last Holmes spoke. What exactly was this group? Reed laughed bitterly. That is the question, isn't it? Indeed. The man rose and crossed toward the window. Rain lashed against the glass. We met here. At Blacktor House? Yes. How often? Every 32 days. Again the number. Again the cycle. The mystery revolved around it like planets around a sun. What happened during these meetings? Holmes asked. Reed shook his head. That's the strange part. What? We never discussed business. Then what? We talked. About everything. The answer seemed absurd. Reed apparently recognized the reaction. It sounds ridiculous. It does, but it's true. He turned. Wrexham gathered men from different professions. Why? He claimed we possessed qualities he needed. Holmes became very still. What qualities? Observation. The answer immediately caught his attention. Go on. Memory. Continue. Reasoning. Now Holmes's eyes glittered. The list sounded familiar, dangerously familiar, as though someone had attempted to assemble a collection of analytical minds. For what purpose remained unclear. What happened after these meetings? Holmes asked. Nothing. You simply returned home. Yes. And then? Reed hesitated. Then Crowe disappeared. The room fell silent. Nathaniel Crowe vanished first? Yes. What explanation was given? Wrexham said Crowe had accepted an assignment. Assignment? That's the word he used. Holmes exchanged a glance with me. The language sounded deliberate. Military almost. What assignment? We weren't told, and the others accepted this. We trusted him. Reed laughed bitterly. Our mistake. Then Malcolm Vane disappeared. Yes. Then you. Yes. Then Marston. The man nodded. Holmes paced slowly across the room. His mind was clearly racing. What happened when your turn came? Reed's face grew pale. For the first time, genuine fear appeared. Wrexham summoned me. Here? Yes. He explained that I had been selected. For what? I asked the same question. And? He said understanding was unnecessary. Did you accept? I refused. That answer surprised me. You refused? Immediately. What happened? Reed looked toward the cellar door. A terrible expression crossed his face. He locked me below. The memory clearly haunted him. The chamber? Yes. The tallies? Reed nodded. I carved them. A chill passed through me. You counted the days. 32. Why 32? His answer came almost as a whisper. Because that was how long they kept each man. Holmes stopped pacing. The room seemed to freeze. 32 days. At last, the number possessed meaning. Not a date, not a code, a duration, a period of confinement. I felt my pulse quicken. You were imprisoned here? Yes. For 32 days? Yes. And then released? Reed laughed hollowly. No. What happened? I escaped. The answer hung heavily in the air. Suddenly many things became clear. The fear, the hiding, the secrecy. Reed had not disappeared voluntarily. At least not for long. "What about Marston?" Holmes asked. "Did he escape as well?" The man's expression changed. For the first time, uncertainty appeared. "I don't know." "You never saw him again?" "No." "And Vane?" "No." "Crow?" "No." The silence that followed was deeply unsettling. 3 men had vanished after entering the cycle. Only Reed had emerged. Only Reed had escaped. If his account was truthful, then the others had not been so fortunate. At length Holmes spoke. "Wrexham." "Yes." "Where is he now?" The question seemed to affect Reed profoundly. His face lost colour. His hands trembled. When he finally answered, his voice was barely audible. "That's why I stayed here." "What do you mean?" "I thought he would return." "Return from where?" Reed looked directly at Holmes, and for the first time since we met him, genuine terror filled his eyes. "Because Theodore Wrexham never controlled this operation." The statement echoed Marston's note. "Wrexham is not the leader. He serves someone else." Holmes noticed the connection immediately. "Then who did?" Reed swallowed. Thunder boomed outside. The house seemed to shudder. Then he spoke a name. A name neither Holmes nor I had ever heard before. Sebastian Vale. The effect upon the room was immediate. A new player, a hidden master, a man who had remained invisible throughout the investigation. Yet before Holmes could ask another question, a gunshot shattered the darkness. Glass exploded behind Reed. The man staggered. A crimson stain spread across his coat. For one terrible instant he remained standing, then he collapsed to the floor. Holmes spun toward the broken window. A shadow moved outside in the storm. A human figure, watching, then disappearing into the rain-swept darkness of the moor. The attack had lasted less than a second, yet it changed everything, because Jonathan Reed had finally revealed the existence of Sebastian Vale, and someone had been waiting to ensure he said no more. Chapter 9. The Name in the Storm. The gunshot echoed through Blacktor House. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. Then Holmes sprang into action. "Watson!" I was already kneeling beside Jonathan Reed. Blood stained his coat near the shoulder. Fortunately, the wound appeared high and to the side. Dangerous, certainly, but not immediately fatal. "The bullet passed through," I said. "Can he survive?" "If infection is avoided, yes." Holmes nodded sharply. "Good." Then he was gone. The speed with which he crossed the room astonished me. One moment he stood beside us. The next he had vanished through the shattered window and into the storm. I heard his footsteps outside. Then silence. The rain swallowed every sound. For nearly 15 minutes I remained occupied with Reed. The man drifted in and out of consciousness. Twice he attempted to speak. Twice pain prevented him. Finally he managed a whisper. "Don't let him find me." "Who?" His eyes opened weakly. "Vale." Then unconsciousness claimed him once more. The name lingered in my thoughts. Sebastian Vale. A man unknown to Scotland Yard, unknown to legal records, unknown even to Holmes, yet powerful enough to command fear from every surviving witness. When Holmes eventually returned, he looked thoroughly drenched. Mud covered his boots, rainwater dripped from his coat, yet despite the conditions, his expression suggested satisfaction. "You found him?" I asked. "No." The answer surprised me. "You seem pleased." "I found something better." He reached into his pocket. A small object rested in his palm. At first glance it appeared insignificant. A brass button. Nothing more. Yet Holmes examined it with obvious interest. "What is it?" The shooter lost it while crossing a stone wall. A button. An unusually expensive one. I looked closer. The metal bore an engraved symbol. A raven. Its wings spread. Its claws extended. A curious emblem, one I had never seen before. Holmes wrapped it carefully. Our marksman left in considerable haste, which means he was frightened. I glanced toward the unconscious Reed. Of us? No. Holmes stared into the darkness beyond the broken window. Of what Reed might reveal. That night we remained at a nearby inn. Reed's condition prevented travel. A local physician assisted me in treating the wound. By midnight, the injured man rested comfortably. Holmes, meanwhile, had converted our sitting room into a temporary headquarters. Maps covered the walls. Notes covered the tables. Documents covered nearly every available surface. At approximately 1 o'clock in the morning, he suddenly asked, "Watson, what do you know of ravens?" I lowered my book. Ravens? Yes. Birds. Profound. You asked. Holmes smiled faintly. Then he placed the brass button before me. The emblem? Yes. I've seen it before. That statement immediately captured my attention. Where? I couldn't remember. And now, I can. He opened a notebook. Inside appeared a sketch copied from an old newspaper. The design matched perfectly. The same raven, the same wings, the same posture. Where did you find that? London. Connected to Wrexham? No. The answer surprised me. Then what? Holmes tapped the page. A private society. The words hung in the air. What sort of society? No one knows. That was not encouraging. He continued. The organization appeared briefly in several financial disputes 15 years ago. What happened? It disappeared. Entirely? Almost, I frowned. Almost. A few references survived. And the name? Holmes looked up. The Ravensmere Circle. The title possessed an unpleasant quality. One could not easily explain why, yet it inspired immediate unease. What was its purpose? Unknown. Membership. Secret. Influence. Considerable. I leaned forward. You believe Wrexham belonged to it. I suspect something far more troubling. What? Holmes folded the notebook. I suspect Wrexham worked for it. The statement recalled Reed's words perfectly. Theodore Wrexham never controlled this operation. He served someone else. For the first time, the theory possessed supporting evidence. A hidden organization, a dead financier, a chain of disappearances, and now Sebastian Vale. The pieces were beginning to align. The following morning brought further developments. Jonathan Reed regained consciousness. Though weak, he could finally answer questions. Holmes wasted no time. Sebastian Vale. Reed visibly flinched. Yes. Who is he? I never met him. Holmes remained silent. The answer was clearly disappointing. You named him. I heard the name. From whom? Wrexham. That interested Holmes immediately. When? During my confinement. The injured man swallowed. One night I overheard an argument. Between whom? Wrexham and another man. Vale? I believe so. What did they discuss? Reed closed his eyes, trying to remember. At length he answered, the schedule. Holmes exchanged a glance with me. The 32 days? Yes. What else? They argued about replacements. The word struck me immediately. Replacements? Reed nodded. I remember that clearly. What context, I don't know. The frustration in his voice appeared genuine. They spoke quietly. Anything else? The man's eyes opened. There was one phrase. Holmes leaned forward. What phrase? The fifth seat must remain occupied. The room fell silent. The fifth seat. A curious expression. One whose meaning remained entirely obscure. Yet Holmes appeared fascinated. He repeated it softly. The fifth seat must remain occupied. Reed nodded. That's exactly what was said. Holmes rose. For several minutes he paced silently. Then he stopped. 5 men. What? I asked. The original group. Crowe. Vane. Reed. Marston. Wrexham. Precisely. His eyes narrowed. And someone insists that all 5 positions remain filled. The implication was disturbing, as though the men themselves mattered less than the roles they occupied. What kind of organization works that way? I asked. Holmes's answer came quietly. The sort that treats human beings as replaceable components. The day passed in further investigation. Several local inquiries revealed that Black Tor House had not been abandoned as long as records suggested. Anonymous payments continued for years. Ownership transferred repeatedly between shell companies. Each trail eventually vanished into legal dead ends. And behind every dead end appeared the same name, Blackthorn Investments. By evening, Holmes had reached a conclusion. Not a solution, but a direction. We return to London tomorrow. Because of Sebastian Vale? Because of the Ravensmere Circle? I nodded. The hidden society had become increasingly central to the mystery. Yet before retiring, Holmes made one final observation. It came while examining the old photograph discovered in Black Tor House. The image of the four men, Marston, Crowe, Vane, Reed. For nearly an hour, Holmes studied it. Then suddenly he smiled, not triumphantly, curiously. "What have you found?" He handed me a magnifying lens. "Observe the background." I examined the photograph. At first, I noticed nothing unusual. Then gradually a detail emerged. Partially obscured behind the group stood another figure, a man, only half visible, his face hidden by shadow, his body turned away, yet one feature remained unmistakable, the coat, a dark overcoat, and upon its sleeve a brass button bearing the emblem of a raven. I looked up sharply. This man was there. Yes, with them. Yes, watching them. Holmes nodded. "And if I am correct, Watson," his voice grew quiet, "we have just found our first image of Sebastian Vale." The realization sent a chill through me, for the invisible mastermind who had manipulated events from the beginning was no longer entirely invisible. We had seen his shadow, and shadows, as Holmes often remarked, always belong to something real. Chapter 10. The Ravensmere Circle. 3 days later, we were once more in Baker Street. London greeted us with its customary fog, noise, and restless energy, yet I could not shake the feeling that we had returned to a city subtly altered. Perhaps it was because the mystery itself had changed. When the case began, we sought a missing barrister. Now we hunted an organization, an invisible network that seemed capable of erasing men from society while leaving almost no trace behind. The name Ravensmere Circle had become the center of Holmes's investigation. And Holmes, once fixed upon a target, rarely abandoned it. For 2 days he scarcely left Baker Street. Letters arrived, telegrams departed. Old records emerged from forgotten archives. Former government clerks received unexpected visitors. Retired judges found themselves answering peculiar questions. By the end of the second day, our sitting room resembled the headquarters of a military campaign. Maps covered one wall. Timelines covered another. At the center stood a large table upon which Holmes had arranged dozens of documents. Each represented a fragment of the puzzle. On the morning of the third day, he finally spoke. "I have been wrong." That declaration immediately captured my attention. Holmes rarely admitted error. When he did, it was usually significant. "In what respect?" He tapped a newspaper clipping. "I believed Theodore Wrexham occupied the center of this affair." "And he does not?" "No." "Then who does?" Holmes looked toward the photograph recovered from Black Tor House. The hidden figure remained partially obscured in shadow. The man behind him, Sebastian Vale, precisely. I poured tea while Holmes organized several documents into a neat stack. "What have you learned?" He selected the first page. "The Ravensmere Circle was founded 17 years ago. By whom? Unknown. Helpful. Very." Holmes smiled faintly. "The founders concealed themselves exceptionally well." He handed me a report. The organization had appeared briefly within several legal disputes, property acquisitions, and financial transactions. Never directly, always indirectly. Names changed, companies changed, Addresses changed, yet a consistent pattern remained. Influential men met privately. Important decisions followed. Records vanished. What was their purpose? I asked. Holmes shook his head. That remains uncertain. Political, perhaps. Financial, possibly. Criminal. His expression grew thoughtful. I no longer believe so. That surprised me. Why not? Because criminals seek profit. And this organization seeks something else. I frowned. What? Holmes picked up another document. Aptitude. The word hung strangely in the air. Aptitude. Observe. The paper contained a list of names. Several had appeared previously. Crowe, Marston, Vane, Reed. Others were unfamiliar. What am I seeing? The professions. I examined them. Accountants, surveyors, barristers, investigators, engineers, military officers, mathematicians. The pattern gradually emerged. These were not random occupations. Each required intelligence, analysis, observation, precision. The same qualities Reed had described. Holmes pointed toward the list. They recruited ability. To what end? That is the mystery. Before we could continue, Lestrade arrived. Unlike previous visits, the inspector appeared genuinely excited. News. Holmes looked up. Good or bad? Depends. On? Whether you enjoy complications. Holmes smiled. I often do. Lestrade produced a folder. We identified the body from Southwark. The announcement immediately caught our attention. You confirmed Malcolm Vane? No. For a moment, Holmes simply stared. Then a faint smile appeared. Excellent. Lestrade groaned. I knew you'd say that. The inspector dropped into a chair. The corpse wasn't Vane. I felt a surge of astonishment. Then who was it? No one knows. That answer was even worse. What do you mean, no one knows? The fingerprints don't match any record. No missing person report? Nothing. Holmes folded his hands. So a stranger was dressed to resemble Vane. Exactly. The inspector shook his head. And before you ask, yes, the beard was partly artificial. The revelation transformed everything. The corpse, the identification, the warnings. All deliberate deceptions. Someone had wanted the police to believe Malcolm Vane was dead. Very badly. Which means Vane may still be alive, I said. Quite, Holmes replied. Lestrade nodded reluctantly. And there's more. Go on. We searched one of Wrexham's former properties. Results? A hidden room. Holmes immediately became attentive. What sort of room? A meeting chamber. The inspector opened his notebook. It contained 5 chairs. The room fell silent. 5 chairs, the 5th seat. The phrase returned immediately. What else? Holmes asked. Nothing. Nothing? Almost nothing. Lestrade produced a sketch. The arrangement was peculiar. 5 chairs positioned around a circular table. No decorations, no records, no names, no explanation. Yet one detail drew Holmes's attention instantly. The chairs were not identical. Each occupied a fixed position. Each differed slightly from the others, as though representing distinct roles. Not individuals, functions. Holmes stared at the sketch for nearly a minute. Then suddenly he rose. What is it? I asked. The 5th seat. Yes? I finally understand. Lestrade looked skeptical. You understand what? Holmes crossed to the table. The organization. You've solved it. No. Then, I understand its structure. He pointed toward the sketch. 5 positions, obviously. Not people. Meaning, skills. The word settled over the room. Holmes continued. Consider our known members. He began counting. Crowe, the accountant. Numbers. He raised another finger. Reed, the surveyor. Measurement. A 3rd finger. Marston, the barrister. Law. A 4th. Vane, the investigator. Observation. Then he stopped. Wrexham. What skill? Holmes' expression darkened. Leadership. The realization struck me immediately. The organization had not selected individuals randomly. It had assembled specific abilities, 5 complementary talents, 5 seats, 5 roles. The men themselves were secondary. The positions mattered. That explained the phrase, "The 5th seat must remain occupied." Not because the man was important, because the role was. For several moments no one spoke. Then Lestrade frowned. Occupied for what purpose? Holmes shook his head. That remains hidden. But you're close. The faint smile that appeared upon Holmes's face confirmed it. Closer than ever. That afternoon a further breakthrough arrived unexpectedly. A telegram, delivered by hand, unsigned. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Holmes opened it. Read it. Then immediately reached for his coat. "What is it?" He handed me the message. The words were brief. "Meet me midnight, St. Jude's Cemetery. Come alone." I looked up. A trap? Certainly. Then why go? Holmes smiled. Because the sender assumes I won't understand something. What? His eyes glittered. The cemetery. I frowned. What about it? Holmes walked to the map hanging beside the fireplace, then pointed toward a location. Observe. I did, and suddenly understood. St. Jude's Cemetery lay only half a mile from Theodore Wrexham's grave. The implication struck immediately. Someone wants you near Wrexham. Exactly. Why? Holmes folded the telegram. I suspect we are about to discover whether Theodore Wrexham truly died. The room became very quiet. Outside, evening shadows stretched across Baker Street. Fog gathered once more around the lamps. And somewhere within that vast city, a hidden adversary prepared his next move. For the first time since the case began, Holmes appeared convinced that Sebastian Vale had made a mistake. A small one, perhaps even an accidental one, but enough. Enough for a man like Sherlock Holmes to begin seeing the shape of the truth concealed behind months of deception. And if that truth lay buried beside Theodore Wrexham's grave, then before the night ended, we would stand closer to the heart of the mystery than ever before. Chapter 11. The Grave Without a Body. That evening remains among the most extraordinary I have ever spent in the company of Sherlock Holmes. At 11:30 we left Baker Street. The fog had returned with unusual density. London seemed transformed into a city of shadows and muffled footsteps. Gas lamps glowed weakly through the mist. Carriages emerged from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. The conditions were ideal for secrecy, which was precisely why Holmes believed our adversary had chosen them. We travelled in silence. Neither of us mentioned the telegram. Neither of us discussed Sebastian Vale. Both subjects occupied our thoughts. Yet Holmes appeared interested in something else entirely. Theodore Wrexham, the dead financier whose influence persisted long after his supposed death. At least, supposed death according to official records. Shortly before midnight we arrived near St. Jude's Cemetery. The place occupied several acres of neglected ground, enclosed by weathered stone walls. Ancient monuments rose from the darkness like broken teeth. The air carried the scent of damp earth, and beneath it all lingered an atmosphere of profound stillness. Holmes checked his watch. 3 minutes. Until midnight? Yes. We entered through the main gate. No caretaker appeared. No visitors. No movement, only silence. Our footsteps echoed faintly among the graves. At last Holmes stopped. Here. I looked around. We stood near a cluster of old monuments. Nothing appeared unusual. What now? We wait. For nearly 10 minutes nothing happened. The fog drifted silently between the headstones. An owl called somewhere in the darkness. Then suddenly Holmes touched my arm. There. A figure emerged from the mist. Tall, darkly dressed, moving cautiously. The stranger approached to within 20 yards, then halted. His face remained concealed, yet something about his posture suggested nervousness. Not confidence, fear. "Mr. Holmes?" The voice was low, educated, controlled. "Yes, you came, obviously." The stranger glanced around, as though expecting pursuit. Then he stepped closer. "I have little time." Holmes remained silent. The man removed an envelope from his coat. "Take this." "Why?" "Because people are dying." The answer came immediately, without hesitation, and with unmistakable sincerity. Holmes accepted the envelope. "Who are you?" The stranger laughed softly. "That question no longer matters." "It matters to me." "Then call me a survivor." The phrase caught my attention. A survivor. Not a witness, not a member, a survivor. Holmes evidently noticed the distinction as well. "Of what?" The man hesitated, then answered, "The Ravensmere Circle." For several moments no one spoke. The stranger looked exhausted, haunted, like a man carrying burdens he no longer wished to bear. "You knew Wrexham?" Holmes asked. "Yes, personally, very." "And Sebastian Vale?" At the name, the stranger visibly stiffened, a revealing reaction. "You know him. Everyone knows him." The answer seemed strange. "What do you mean?" I asked. The man looked toward me, then back at Holmes. A peculiar expression crossed his face. "That's the problem." "What problem?" The stranger swallowed. "Everyone knows Sebastian Vale." A gust of wind swept across the cemetery. For a moment the fog shifted, then settled again. Holmes stepped forward. "Explain." The man shook his head. "I cannot." "Cannot? Or perhaps will not?" The distinction irritated Holmes. "You summoned me here to speak in riddles." "I summoned you because you are running out of time." That answer carried enough conviction to silence further objections. The stranger pointed toward the envelope. "Everything I know is inside." "And after I read it," the man smiled sadly, "you'll understand why the grave matters." Before Holmes could respond, a sound echoed from beyond the cemetery wall. A whistle, brief, sharp. The stranger immediately paled. "They found me." "Who?" But the man was already backing away. "You must leave." "Wait." "Leave now." He turned and vanished into the fog. The entire encounter had lasted less than 3 minutes. I instinctively moved to pursue him. Holmes stopped me. "No." "What?" "No." "Why?" He held up the envelope. "Because this is why he came." We retreated toward a sheltered monument. There Holmes opened the package. Several documents lay inside: financial records, property transfers, letters. Most appeared mundane. Then Holmes discovered a folded sheet hidden among them. His eyes widened slightly. A rare reaction. "What is it?" Without speaking, he handed me the paper. It was a burial certificate, official, stamped, signed, authentic in every appearance. The name immediately captured my attention. Theodore Wrexham. I scanned the document. Date of death, place of death, cause of death. Everything appeared ordinary. Then I noticed the final section, body identification. My pulse quickened. The signature line was blank, completely blank. I looked up. No one identified him. Precisely. Holmes folded the paper. No relative, no doctor, no witness, no one. The implication was obvious. The body buried as Theodore Wrexham might never have been Theodore Wrexham at all. We continued examining the contents. A second document proved even more remarkable. It listed ownership transfers involving Blackthorn Investments. One entry had been circled, repeatedly, as though someone desperately wished us to notice it. The transfer occurred 2 days after Wrexham's death. The recipient's name was concealed behind a legal trust, yet another signature remained visible. S. Vale. The room seemed to tilt around me. Sebastian Vale. Alive, active, operating immediately after Wrexham's death, almost as though he had expected it, or arranged it. Holmes examined the document carefully, then suddenly looked toward the cemetery map mounted near the gate. "What is it?" He pointed. "Wrexham's grave." "What about it?" "It's in the wrong place." I stared. "The wrong place?" "Observe." He indicated the cemetery layout. Most graves followed neat rows. Wrexham's did not. Instead, it occupied an isolated corner. separated from neighbouring plots, almost hidden, as though chosen deliberately. Without another word, Holmes began walking. We crossed the cemetery, past dozens of monuments, finally arrived at the grave itself. The headstone appeared expensive, well maintained. Impressive, exactly the sort of monument a wealthy man might receive. Holmes examined it carefully, then knelt. For nearly a minute he studied the earth. At last he smiled, not triumphantly, coldly. "What have you found?" He pointed. Fresh disturbance, subtle, almost invisible, yet unmistakable to trained eyes. The soil had been dug up recently, very recently. A chill passed through me. Someone opened the grave. Yes. When? Within the last week. I stared at the mound. The implications were extraordinary. If Wrexham's body was here, Holmes interrupted. That is the question. He rose, then glanced around. The cemetery remained deserted. Fog swirled among the monuments. No witnesses, no caretakers, no interruption, only opportunity. Watson. Yes? We require a spade. The word sent a shock through me. You intend to exhume the body. I intend to determine whether a body exists. Half an hour later, with considerable effort and very little dignity, we had acquired the necessary tools. What followed was among the strangest experiences of my life. The soil proved loose, far looser than expected, evidence of recent excavation. Holmes worked methodically. Neither of us spoke. At last the coffin appeared. The lid bore signs of recent disturbance. Fresh scratches, fresh nails, fresh wood. Someone had opened it, recently. Holmes removed the final fastening, then slowly lifted the lid. For a moment neither of us moved, neither of us breathed. Then I looked inside, and felt every drop of blood leave my face. The coffin was empty, completely empty. No body, no bones, nothing, only darkness. For several seconds the absurd reality refused to register. Theodore Wrexham's grave contained no corpse. At last I found my voice. Good God! Holmes remained staring into the coffin. His expression revealed neither surprise nor triumph, only confirmation, as though he had expected exactly this. What does it mean? He answered without looking away. It means Theodore Wrexham was never buried here. Before I could reply, a sound emerged from the darkness behind us. Applause. Slow. Measured. Mocking. Holmes turned instantly. A figure stood beyond the fog. Tall. Elegant. Perfectly still. The stranger's face remained hidden, yet his voice carried clearly through the night. Remarkable, Mr. Holmes. The applause ceased. You are every bit as clever as they claimed. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Neither man moved, neither man looked away. Then the stranger spoke again. My name is Sebastian Vale, and for the first time since the mystery began, Sherlock Holmes stood face to face with the man behind it all. Chapter 12. The Master of Ravensmere. The figure stood motionless beyond the open grave. Fog drifted between us. The cemetery had become unnaturally silent. Even the wind seemed to have withdrawn. For several moments neither Holmes nor the stranger spoke. They simply regarded one another. Two men measuring an opponent. Two minds assessing possibilities. At length Holmes broke the silence. Sebastian Vale. The stranger inclined his head. Mr. Holmes. His voice was calm, cultured, pleasant even. Nothing in it suggested violence. I had long since learned that the most dangerous men rarely sounded dangerous. You're difficult to find, Holmes continued. Vale smiled. That has always been useful. The man stepped forward. For the first time his features became visible. He appeared younger than I expected, perhaps 45, tall, impeccably dressed, clean-shaven. His eyes possessed a remarkable quality. Not cruelty, not arrogance, calculation, the gaze of a man who weighed everything, including human beings. I confess, said Vale, I hoped you would discover the grave. You arranged it. Naturally. Holmes nodded. I suspected as much. Vale glanced toward the empty coffin. A dramatic touch, don't you think? I prefer facts to theatre. The man laughed softly. And yet here we stand. I noticed something peculiar. Vale did not appear frightened, nor cornered, nor even concerned. Rather, he seemed curious, as though Holmes represented an intellectual challenge rather than a threat. The realization unsettled me. "Where is Theodore Wrexham?" Holmes asked. Vale's expression remained unchanged. "Alive," the answer came instantly, without hesitation, without embarrassment. The admission itself was extraordinary. After months of deception, he simply acknowledged the truth. Then his death was staged. Yes. Why? Vale looked toward the empty grave. For the same reason every move was made. Which is? Necessity. Holmes smiled faintly. A remarkably flexible word. The stranger appeared amused. You dislike it. I distrust it. Vale folded his hands behind his back. Then perhaps I should explain. For the next several minutes, the mystery finally began to unravel. Not completely, but enough. Enough for its shape to emerge. The Ravensmere Circle, Vale said, began as an experiment. An experiment in what? Selection. The word hung in the cold air. Selection of whom? Holmes asked. Exceptional minds. I saw Holmes's expression sharpen. The answer aligned perfectly with our discoveries. The professions, the skills, the 5 seats, Vale continued. Most organizations select men because of wealth, or influence, or family. He smiled faintly. We selected competence. The admission was astonishing. You recruited specialists. Precisely. The accountant, numbers. The investigator, observation. The barrister, law. The surveyor, measurement. Vale nodded approvingly. You see it. And Wrexham, coordination. The 5th seat, leadership. The final role. The pattern was complete. Holmes folded his arms. To what end? For the first time, Vale hesitated. Then he answered. To solve problems. I could not suppress a laugh. The explanation sounded absurd. Vale noticed. You're skeptical, Doctor. Understandably. The man nodded. Most people are. He looked toward Holmes. The government fails. The police fail. The courts fail. Occasionally, Holmes replied. Frequently. Vale's voice hardened. Criminals escape punishment. Corruption flourishes. Evidence disappears. Truth becomes negotiable. The intensity surprised me. This was no ordinary criminal mastermind boasting of superiority. This was a man who genuinely believed in his mission, and that made him far more dangerous. So you created a private organization, Holmes said. Yes, operating beyond the law, operating where the law could not. Holmes smiled. The distinction is convenient. Vale ignored the remark. For years, Ravensmere succeeded. Then what changed? At that question, the man's expression altered. The confidence remained. The certainty did not. Wrexham changed. A long silence followed. Theodore Wrexham betrayed you. Vale looked away briefly, perhaps the first genuine emotion I had seen from him. Disappointment. Yes. The answer was almost reluctant. What happened? Holmes asked. Wrexham became ambitious. Meaning? He stopped serving the circle and began serving himself. Vale nodded. The pieces shifted once more. Everything traced back to Wrexham, not as mastermind, as traitor, as the man who had corrupted the system. He used Blackthorn Investments, Holmes said, to hide money. Yes. To conceal operations. Yes. To build influence. Again Vale nodded. For several moments Holmes remained silent. Then he asked the question that mattered most. The disappearances. Vale's expression became unreadable. What about them? The 32 days. The cemetery seemed to grow still. Even Vale appeared thoughtful. At length he answered, "The disappearances were examinations." I stared. Examinations? He looked toward me. The circle tested candidates. By imprisoning them? No. Then, by removing them. The explanation made little sense. Holmes evidently agreed. Clarify. Vale sighed softly. The modern world is full of distractions, status, comfort, habit, expectation. He gestured broadly. We wish to know who men truly were. The words sounded almost philosophical, yet beneath them lurked something deeply disturbing. So you abducted people. We isolated them, against their will. Sometimes. The casual admission chilled me. Holmes's eyes narrowed. And what exactly occurred during these examinations? Vale hesitated. For the first time, a significant hesitation. Then he answered. They were given a choice. What choice? To remain. The simplicity of the answer concealed enormous implications. Remain where? Within Ravensmere. And if they refused? Vale looked directly at Holmes. Most accepted. That was not my question. The cemetery fell silent. At last the man spoke. They left. The answer sounded false. Holmes recognized it immediately. So did I. The vanished men, the threats, the false corpse, the hidden prisons. Too many facts contradicted his explanation. You are lying, Holmes said calmly. Vale smiled. A little. The honesty of the response was somehow more unsettling than deception. Holmes took a step forward. Where is Adrian Marston? The question struck with precision. Vale's expression changed. Only slightly, yet enough. The barrister mattered. More than the others. Why? Holmes saw it too. Marston discovered something. Silence. He learned the truth about Wrexham. Silence. He refused to cooperate. Still silence. Then Vale smiled. You're close. The words confirmed everything. Adrian Marston had become dangerous. Not because of what he was, because of what he knew. Holmes pressed further. Marston's first disappearance. No. The second. No. Then what? For the first time, Sebastian Vale laughed. Not mockingly, admiringly. You continue asking the wrong question. Holmes remained perfectly still. What question should I ask? Vale's eyes gleamed. The same question Marston finally asked. The atmosphere changed instantly. Something fundamental had shifted. Holmes recognized it. So did I. We were approaching the core of the mystery, the secret that connected every disappearance, every deception, every death. Vale stepped backward into the fog. You've spent weeks searching for missing men. His voice drifted through the darkness. But the disappearances were never the mystery. Then what was? Holmes called. The answer came from the mist. Quiet, clear, and profoundly unsettling. The mystery is why every man who discovered the truth chose to disappear again. The words echoed across the cemetery. Then silence returned. Complete silence. Sebastian Vale had vanished. As suddenly as he had appeared, I started forward. Holmes stopped me. No. What? He wanted us to chase him. Why? Holmes stared into the fog. His expression had changed. Not confusion, recognition. For the first time since the case began, he had seen something. Something hidden, in plain sight. Something enormous. What is it? I asked. He looked toward the empty grave, then toward the documents, then toward the darkness where Vale had stood. Finally he spoke, and his voice carried a certainty I had not heard before. Good heavens, what? Holmes turned slowly. Theodore Wrexham was never the traitor. A chill passed through me. What do you mean? His eyes remained fixed upon the fog. The entire story is inverted. The realization seemed to strike him all at once, like lightning illuminating a landscape. Watson. Yes? We've been hunting the wrong man from the beginning. The words lingered in the cold cemetery air, and in that moment I understood that the final truth remained hidden just beyond our reach. Yet Sherlock Holmes had finally glimpsed it. The last pieces were falling into place, and soon the mystery of the barrister who disappeared twice would be explained in full. Chapter 13. The Barrister's Secret. The following evening, at precisely 8 o'clock, the sitting room of 221B Baker Street contained one of the most unusual assemblies I have ever witnessed. Inspector Lestrade occupied his customary chair near the fireplace. Sir Percival Marston sat opposite him, pale and visibly anxious. Jonathan Reed, still recovering from his wound, rested beside the window. Several officials from Scotland Yard stood nearby. Even Theodore Wrexham was present. Alive, very much alive. His dramatic reappearance had shocked everyone except Holmes. The former financier sat quietly, his expression grave and exhausted. Only one figure was absent, Sebastian Vale, and that absence was entirely intentional. The lamps were lit, the curtains drawn. Outside, London drifted through another fog-filled evening. Inside, all eyes remained fixed upon Sherlock Holmes. He stood before the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back. His gaze travelled slowly across the room. At length he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case began with a disappearance." His voice remained calm. Adrian Marston vanished. He paused, then vanished again. The room remained silent. For weeks, every piece of evidence appeared to point toward abduction, conspiracy, imprisonment, and murder. He nodded toward Lestrade. The police pursued criminals. Toward Wrexham. We pursued deception. Toward Reed. We pursued survivors. Then Holmes smiled faintly, and we were all mistaken. The statement immediately provoked murmurs. Lestrade frowned. Mistaken how? Holmes turned. Because Adrian Marston was never the victim. Silence. Complete silence. Sir Percival stared in disbelief. "My nephew was never abducted." The old gentleman rose halfway from his chair. "That's impossible." "No." Holmes's voice remained steady, merely unexpected. He crossed to the table. Upon it rested dozens of documents collected during our investigation. The first disappearance. He lifted a newspaper. 9 days. Another paper. The second disappearance, a note. The warnings, a photograph. The secret meetings. One by one the pieces accumulated. For weeks these events appeared connected. Because they were. The room leaned toward him collectively, waiting, listening. Yet we interpreted them incorrectly. Holmes picked up Adrian Marston's warning letter, the one that had begun everything. "Do not trust appearances." He held it up. The most honest statement in the entire case. The significance struck me immediately. Not trust appearances. The warning had applied to everything, including Marston himself. Holmes continued. "Throughout this investigation, we assumed Adrian Marston feared someone." He shook his head. He did not. "Then why write the letter?" asked Lestrade. "Because he feared something." The distinction mattered profoundly. Holmes turned toward Theodore Wrexham. "Tell them." For a moment Wrexham hesitated, then he rose. The room became very still. "I joined Ravensmere 12 years ago." His voice carried exhaustion rather than pride. At first, Sebastian Vale's intentions seemed noble. No politics, no profit, no ambition, only the pursuit of solutions. He laughed bitterly. A dangerous dream. The room remained silent. Were men recruited? Yes. Were they tested? Yes. Were they confined? Occasionally. He nodded toward Reed, though never as harshly as some believed. Reed looked unconvinced. Wrexham lowered his gaze. Yet something changed. The circle became obsessed. His voice darkened. Not with solving problems, with improving people. The phrase produced visible confusion. Holmes nodded. Continue. Worthiness. Potential. Transformation. The financier shook his head. Vale began believing that society itself was the problem. A chill passed through the room. He wanted to build something better. What? Lestrade demanded. Wrexham answered softly, a society governed entirely by exceptional minds. The room fell silent. The implications were enormous and deeply troubling. Holmes resumed speaking. Thus the 5 seats. The structure finally became clear. The accountant, the investigator, the surveyor, the barrister, the coordinator. 5 abilities, 5 functions, 5 minds, not individuals, components, pieces of a machine. But Marston discovered this, I said. Yes. Holmes nodded. He discovered far more. The detective picked up another document, a legal file, the property dispute. Harcourt versus Belling. Remember it? Lestrade nodded. The missing witness statements. Precisely. Holmes smiled. The documents everyone ignored. He opened the file. Inside rested several recovered pages. Marston examined land records connected to Blackthorne investments. Routine legal work. Until he noticed something extraordinary. The room waited. Holmes looked directly at Wrexham. Tell them. The financier closed his eyes briefly, then answered. There was no Ravensmere circle. The statement struck the room like thunder. No one spoke. No one moved. I confess that even I struggled to comprehend the words. What do you mean? Lestrade finally asked. Wrexham laughed sadly. The organisation existed. Certainly. The meetings existed. The members existed. The operations existed. He looked around the room. But the circle itself? He shook his head. It was only Sebastian Vale. A profound silence followed. At last, understanding began to emerge. Holmes spoke quietly. 5 seats, 5 specialists, 5 disappearances, 5 replacements, all part of something larger, something hidden. He wasn't building an organization, I whispered. Holmes nodded. He was building himself. The truth landed with astonishing force. Suddenly every mystery aligned, every contradiction, every deception, every disappearance. Lestrade stared. You'd better explain. Holmes obliged. Sebastian Vale recruited talented individuals. Why? To learn from them. He pointed toward the records. The accountant taught him financial systems. The investigator taught surveillance. The surveyor taught logistics. The barrister taught legal manipulation. The coordinator taught organization. Each revelation deepened the horror. He isolated them, studied them, copied them, absorbed their expertise. Holmes's voice hardened, and when they ceased being useful, they disappeared. The room remained frozen. No one interrupted. No one questioned. The explanation fit too perfectly. The 32-day cycle, the confinements, the secrecy, the replacements, everything. Theodore Wrexham nodded. Marston discovered the pattern. How? He found private records, notes, evaluations, psychological profiles. The financier looked away. Vale wasn't creating a council. He was creating a single perfect mind. I felt genuinely chilled. The idea was madness, yet a highly intelligent madness, the most dangerous kind. Holmes continued. When Marston discovered the truth, he faced a choice. Expose Vale? No. Run? No. Then what? Holmes smiled faintly. The same choice every man eventually faced. The room leaned forward, waiting. The final answer. The answer hidden from the beginning. What choice? Lestrade asked. Holmes looked directly at him. Join him. Silence. Absolute silence. Then Holmes delivered the final revelation. Adrian Marston's first disappearance occurred because he accepted. Shock spread through the room. Sir Percival stared in disbelief. No. Yes. He joined Ravensmere voluntarily. Initially. The old man's face paled. And the second disappearance? Holmes's expression softened. That was voluntary as well. The room erupted. Questions. Protests. Disbelief. Holmes raised a hand. Instant silence returned. He did not vanish because he was taken. He vanished because he chose to. The detective crossed toward the window. Outside, fog drifted across Baker Street. The secret Sebastian Vale, protected above all else, was not murder, not imprisonment, not conspiracy. He turned. It was persuasion. The room fell silent once more. Every man who disappeared eventually chose to leave his former life. Crowe, Vane, Marston, even Wrexham once. Each had seen something, learned something, believed something. The truth frightened Marston. Holmes nodded. But it fascinated him too. The detective looked toward the door, then checked his watch. Exactly 8:30. Right on schedule. A faint smile appeared. The reason I know this. The door opened. Everyone turned. For a moment nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. Then Sir Percival rose abruptly. His chair crashed backward. Adrian, the man standing in the doorway, removed his hat. Older, thinner, but unmistakably Adrian Marston. Alive, healthy, and calm. The barrister who disappeared twice had finally returned. For several seconds the room remained frozen. Then Adrian spoke. His first words ended the mystery forever. "I never disappeared," he said quietly. "I simply stopped being the man everyone expected me to be." The room fell silent, and Sherlock Holmes's greatest case of deception reached its astonishing conclusion. In the weeks that followed, the remaining mysteries were resolved. Sebastian Vale vanished before Scotland Yard could arrest him. Despite extensive efforts, neither Holmes nor the police ever located him again. Whether he escaped England or simply assumed another identity remains unknown. The Ravensmere Circle ceased to exist. Its records were destroyed, its properties abandoned, its influence dissolved. As for Adrian Marston, he eventually reconciled with his uncle and resumed a quieter legal career under a different name. He never fully explained what had occurred during his disappearances. Holmes once remarked that some mysteries survive because those who know the truth no longer wish to tell it. Years later, when I asked whether Sebastian Vale had been criminal, visionary, or madman, Holmes gave a characteristically thoughtful reply. "My dear Watson, the most dangerous individuals are those who possess enough wisdom to recognize society's flaws and enough arrogance to believe they alone can correct them." Then he returned to his violin, and thus concluded the singular affair of the barrister who disappeared twice, a case that began with a locked room, passed through graves and secret societies, and ended with a far more unsettling truth, that a man may vanish completely without ever being kidnapped, imprisoned, or killed. Sometimes he simply chooses to become someone else.